Thanks for staying with us on South Africa Tonight. While former DA leader Mmusi Maimane has slammed former DA leader Tony Leon for calling him an experiment that went wrong. Maimane says this statement is dehumanizing as he is no one's experiment. Leon reportedly said this in an interview with News 24 this week. ENCA has reached out to Leon for comment, but he apparently is unavailable to speak to us this evening. However, I am joined by Mmusi Maimane to discuss this matter further. Mmusi, always a pleasure speaking to you. Very good evening to you. Have you read the book?
Good evening, and firstly, happy Easter to all fellow South Africans. I think it's a special weekend. Secondly, no, I haven't read the book because I don't subscribe to the views expressed in the book. But not only that, it's not that you read all things that you agree with. When I read both the comments, the context within which they were placed on, felt that it would then be unnecessary for me to read the rest of the context if that's the frame of the author and the belief that they hold about the people of this country, and certainly myself.
Yeah. Well, Tony Leon is clearly not a very big fan of how you led the Democratic Alliance. In fact, in an extract detailing a meeting of the Federal Executive in 2019, he says, Kutsia Leroux and I were severely depressed at the lack of statesmanship evident in the room and the descent into mediocrity that several of the party leaders evidence. Were you aware that this indeed is how Tony Leon viewed your leadership within the Democratic Alliance? Because these are heavy, cynical allegations against you.
Well, I think first and foremost, if that's Mr. Leon's view of the broader leadership of the DA, I think it's important for them to respond to that issue. But I think second of all, I think it's important to understand the frame with which this issue begins. When Mr. Leon led the DA, there was no doubt that he created a very strong allegiance with the National Party. They created the impression that ultimately anyone who came on board that particular project needed to be a fight back, a consolidation of minorities. And therefore, that's how his frame going into the DA is. He certainly rejected and rejects the notion that there can be a multiracial organization. I certainly believe that. And I also recognize that in how he's referring to people as experiments demonstrates that in some ways they are experimenters and the ones to be experimented on. So if you look at human beings like that, you can then naturally conclude that in looking at them, obviously statements like they lack statesmanship, etc., is what Toni Morrison in her incredible work cited as the fact that you, A, can never be good enough, B, there's always a new obstacle on the way. Someone will criticize you to say you have no intellect, you prove that, and you prove academically. They say, but you're still not good enough because the next thing you must prove there's culture. These are all massive distractions that in fact always ensure that you are never good enough, you'll never achieve much. And for me, whilst the comments were dehumanizing, they weren't in many ways surprising. And therefore, ultimately, I stand up and say, we've got to focus on the future. We've got to focus on South Africans, both black and white, who believe that to dehumanize other human beings is simply uncalled for. We have got greater challenges, and black and white South Africans can work together towards the prosperity of all South Africans.
Do you think that this indeed would be a former DA leader showing the true colors of a Democratic Alliance as well as its agenda, in the sense of saying that by you being referred to as an experiment that went wrong, let's not forget the fact that you're a black man here. So does that mean that you're a black man who was experimented on, and unfortunately as a black man in this country, you as an experiment went wrong?
The history of our society has always been littered with such. And I think, to me, when I reflect on the project I was trying to lead inside the DA, it was a project that said, can black people and white people work together as equals? Not as servants, not as anything less than, just as equals. And I think when I reflect on the fact that some within the DA might have rejected that project, it's clear that the current project is totally different to that. I maintain that ultimately in the long run of this issue, the true colors are being revealed. And some of these comments are made well within a context where, as a black South African, I reject the dehumanizing effect that anyone will stand up publicly and be able to say, we are happy to experiment on you, or you were an experiment. I find that uncalled for, it is unjust, and I think it should be rejected. But then again, as I say, our focus now must be, as I started, when I left the DA, it was precisely for some of these sentiments that were occurring. I had to build one South Africa movement outside because I genuinely believed in a non-racial South Africa and believe that black people and white people can work together as equals.
Yeah. Mmusi, you believe in a non-racial South Africa. You were in the Democratic Alliance. Does the DA believe in a non-racial South Africa where a black person and a white person can truly be equals? Is there such an agenda or even a strategy within the DA to recognize blacks and whites getting equitable opportunities?
Well, given the recent comments, and certainly the comment that has just been made, I would argue that on the last day I spoke at the DA, I said I truly believed that the DA is no longer the vehicle best suited to advance that cause. I happen to also believe that the body politic in this country has been split in such a way that today we talk about black parties and we talk about white parties. That does not aid the reconciliation project, neither does it help the redress project, which we desperately need in this country. Therefore, on the broad spectrum of the issue, I think our body politic and our leadership has failed the reconciliation project. That's why you end up with citizens who are pulling away from each other, and as a society we are being polarized on racial terms. The job that we've got at the moment is indeed to build something fresh. And yes, so to your question, I do not believe that there is that project. I think that the project that I'm working on is certainly one that could not be accommodated within the DA. That's why I had to leave and build one that says, how do we build a reconciled, non-racial, a movement for all South Africans that will achieve this very society that we want to see.
Out of interest, Mmusi, has Tony Leon actually reached out to you in the last day or so to give clarity on his statements and his comments?
No, certainly not. And I don't think I've got much to say, seeing as his comments are well documented. And I certainly don't believe that there will be much to clarify in this matter, because I think it's when you reflect on such statements, they become ones that are not said to you as an individual only, but are a reflection on so many people. There are so many hardworking people inside the DA, and I'm hoping that before he even reaches out to me, he reaches out to those citizens who are standing up today, fighting day in, day out. I hope that he's able to explain to them who are the experimenters and who is the experiment being played on, if he genuinely believes that particular story. And so therefore, I'm not interested in anyone seeking to sell a book on the back of my name. I certainly am committed to a project that truly says, look, we've got better things to fight about in this country. Our education is a mess. Our unemployment is a mess. Let's focus on those.
We'll leave it there. Mmusi Maimane, one is a movement leader. They're giving us insight in terms of his remarks following what Tony Leon allegedly said on a News 24 interview, saying that he was indeed an experiment that went wrong. Of course, that book by Tony Leon is out as well. We tried to reach out for comment from Tony Leon, but it looks as though he's unavailable to speak. On to this story, however.